Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We are continuing the supplement myth busting series. I feel like it's been a while since I've done one of these episodes. And to be truthful, it's because they take a ton of work and preparation and research, and I haven't had the luxury of time recently. There's just been a lot of stuff going on, all good things. But yeah, I've been wanting to do like this particular topic for a while because I am a fan personally of fun drinks in all varieties. So I wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about, yeah, it's not really a supplement. It's more of like a food product, but it totally falls into the ethos of the supplement myth busting series, and that is prebiotic sodas. Um, so Ollipop, Poppi, Culture Pop, some of those healthy, trendy sodas that are better for you, question mark. That's what we're going to cover today. Those things that you see on the market. I'm not going to cover much on like probiotic drinks because I really feel like that deserves its own episode. So like we're not really going to talk as much about kombucha, kefir, or probiotic sodas as much, but they are kind of usually right next to each other in the aisle and go hand in hand often. So I'll talk about them a little bit, but we are going to dedicate a full episode to those eventually. So sit tight for that. So what are prebiotic sodas? So if you're watching the video, I've got an Ollipop here. This is not sponsored, but just to what a beautiful sound. But just to start this off a little bit biased. I am a fan of these, not for everyone. I just personally like a fun drink and like to drink something out of a can. I drank soda growing up. Um, Not a ton of it, but we definitely had soda in our household. So seeing these come on the market as a dietitian and as someone who used to drink a lot of soda growing up, yeah, I was totally interested to try them out. But what they basically are is they're usually in like the soda aisle or they're in the refrigerated section with the kombuchas, depending on where you go. And they're essentially marketed as a healthier alternative to soda. They're anywhere from that to marketed as like a health drink. And I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle and a little bit, it depends. So prebiotic sodas tend to contain, they're usually carbonated beverages in a can that are kind of meant to replace a soda, but they contain something called prebiotic fiber. So prebiotics are essentially fibers that feed the bacteria in our microbiome, especially our gut microbiome. Probiotics are the live cultures themselves that also may or may not affect our gut bacteria. So most of the time, the prebiotic soda kind of niche, like Ollipop and Poppi, Tervita, and there's another one called Wild Wonder. These tend to contain prebiotics and not probiotics, although I believe Wild Wonder, which is a little less popular, does contain both. There's also Culture Pop that's super popular. That's more of a probiotic soda, so we'll cover that a little bit more in that episode. Um, but the beverages like Poppi and Ollipop, they are prebiotic sodas. They mostly contain fiber as their claim to fame, essentially. So let's kind of talk about some examples of this because Ollipop and Poppi are kind of marketed similarly, but they actually contain different ingredients that may or may not achieve similar outcomes. So let's start with Ollipop since that's what I'm drinking. It's a Dr. Good one, so they're kind of like it's kind of like the Dr. Pepper version. So what I think Ollipop does is they really try to say, hey, you drank this type of soda, maybe as a kid or maybe as an adult, and you're trying to drink the same thing but have it be better for you. So let's just make it taste similar to the one you're used to drinking. So they have like a cream soda, a Dr. Goodwin, which is meant to be like Dr. Pepper. They have like a cola, which is meant to be like Pepsi or Coke. They've got something called like Ridge Rush, which I think is supposed to be like Mountain Dew or Sierra Mist. And they have some funky flavors too, like banana cream, strawberries, and vanilla. They've got an orange one that's meant to be like an orange soda. So they're kind of really trying to be like replace your Dr. Pepper with a Dr. Goodwin. It's better for you. Whereas I would say Poppi has that as well. They do have like cream soda, and some of those like knockoff type of flavors to soda flavors. And they also seem to have a lot more flavors, like blueberry and cherry and just more like fruity flavors. That's probably somewhere between like, hey, this is supposed to replace a soda and this is supposed to replace or compete with like Spindrift. Um, we're not going to cover seltzers here much because there's so many, and it's basically carbonated water with flavoring. Whereas prebiotic sodas tend to have more than just that. But let's start with Ollipop. So some of these are caffeinated. So this Dr. Pepper one is caffeinated. Most of the caffeinated ones have about 50 milligrams of caffeine in them. So that would probably be similar to like a regular caffeinated soda. And I've noticed to the Poppi and Ollipop brands, if it's like replacing a soda that tended to be caffeinated, they also caffeinate their version. And if it's replacing a soda that wasn't caffeinated, like orange soda or ginger ale, they don't caffeinate their version. So 50 milligrams isn't nothing. It's also not as much as like a cup of coffee. It's more similar to just regular soda. Ollipop has 9 grams of fiber in it. So that's a lot of fiber. The fiber recommendations for general healthy Americans is 25 grams for women per day and 38 grams for men per day. I see people, and in some cases, I recommend higher than that. I'm rarely recommending lower than that unless it's like specific days, like the day before your marathon. But general, like day to day, week to week, month to month, on average throughout the year, I generally agree with those recommendations. If anything, if we can achieve a little bit higher fiber without any negative side effects, that tends to also be good for cholesterol, blood sugar, gut health, and those types of things. So 9 grams, math real quick, that's like way more than any other drink for the most part, right? Because most other drinks are not containing fiber in them. That's about 36% of your daily value if you're female, which is what I'm using here because I know 88% of my listeners are female. The fiber in Ollipop in particular comes from chicory root, Jerusalem artichoke, and cassava fiber. The flavors vary a little bit, but that tends to be what's called their Ollie Smart concoction. There's also a couple other like herbs in here that aren't researched as robustly as prebiotic fiber to have like specific health benefits. And they're in pretty small amounts, and a lot of them are to be like used as flavoring. Like for example, I know the Dr. Goodwin one contains like tart cherry juice to kind of help with that cherry flavor, plum juice, prune juice. So there are some other like fruit juices sometimes in these as well that are to help with flavoring and also to help contribute to the kind of prebiotic fiber health component of this. So I want to talk a little bit about the 3 big ones in Ollipop, and then we're going to move on to Poppi. Chicory root, Jerusalem artichoke, and cassava. What do these do? Is there research behind them? Because when I'm talking about the supplement myth busting aspect of our prebiotic sodas, all they're cracked up to be, do they live up to the claims of being a health drink, being good for you, or just being kind of like an expensive, fancy alternative to something else? It's really going to come down to the individual ingredients and like what the research has been done on those and the dose. So when it comes to Ollipop, chicory root, so you're aware, some people are sensitive to these things too. So we're going to talk about some pros and cons at the end. But chicory root is about 68% of something called inulin fiber. And inulin fiber helps grow beneficial keystone species. So beneficial, the good guys in your gut microbiome, like bifidobacterium, lactobacillus. And these 2 strains of bacteria make something called short chain fatty acids. And these help reduce inflammation and strengthen our gut barrier. This can help promote regularity. It can help promote just a healthier gut microbiome. And it can also help promote less like intestinal permeability. Once we start to have intestinal permeability, people start to be really sensitive to a lot of different foods. And that's where maybe you're like, I used to tolerate gluten, or I used to tolerate dairy, or I used to tolerate apples or peppers or broccoli, but now I can't. And now I'm taking a food sensitivity test and it's telling me I'm sensitive to like 20 different foods. These are usually the people who don't have food sensitivities. They have intestinal permeability. So the environment we're putting the food into is what's causing us to have these symptoms. And it's not necessarily the food's fault completely, compared to like an IgE mediated food allergy or like an enzyme deficiency that can lead to like an intolerance, like a lactose intolerance. So Bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, super good for us. These beneficial gut bacteria are our keystone species. They produce byproducts that help maintain our GI health and therefore our overall health. So chicory root contains inulin, which helps basically feed these species. So that's claim to fame. Jerusalem artichoke is a non-digestible, I always butcher this, fructooligosacchariide, or FOS, which is basically a non-digestible type of carbohydrate or plant fiber. It is the F in FODMAP, if you're familiar with the FODMAP diet, which may help bifidobacterium species grow. So kind of similar claim to fame as chicory root. It helps bifido specifically grow because it's non-digestible, which means that the bacteria are the ones eating it, to put it simply, compared to us. And those bacteria produce good things for us. Jerusalem artichoke, good source of prebiotic fiber. Cassava, the third kind of big ingredient in these products, is a high resistant starch. So just another type of prebiotic fiber that's not really digestible, and supports the growth of particularly bifidobacterium, so that awesome species again, and Akkermansia. Akkermansia, I could and should probably do a whole podcast episode on. But this particular species of bacteria is quite important. They produce things like mucus to help with gut barrier lining. It helps promote GLP-1, ooh, super trendy, types of outcomes in the body. So to help with, there's a lot of research coming out on Akkermansia as it pertains to like blood sugar and metabolism and weight gain and body composition changes and this type of thing. And it's not as simple typically as take Akkermansia and all of your problems will be fixed. But we do want to promote our body's own growth of this species, and eating enough fiber is one way to do that. Cassava fiber in particular is a resistant starch. You can also have resistant starch if you have sweet potatoes or rice and you cool them. That can create resistant starch as well. Cassava is just another root vegetable. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but in my opinion, cassava also makes the best gluten-free like pasta alternatives if you have to be gluten-free and can't have regular pasta. Just my 2 cents on cassava. And that is in particular too because it's typically well tolerated. So if you're having to be gluten-free for celiac disease or because you're trying to sort out GI issues where gluten might be temporarily interfering with that, cassava just tends to be a decent alternative that also mimics gluten well compared to some of the other gluten-free alternatives that I've tried. So these are the three big ones in Ollipop in particular, and we've got 9 grams of fiber. So my takeaway is 9 grams of fiber, like I said, like over a third of our daily value of fiber as a female. So we're going to talk about pros and cons at the end, but when it comes to endurance athletes, pros and cons versus general population pros and cons, we're going to talk about that. But I want you to be thinking about that dose. Poppi, which I don't have one with me, but I do like Poppi as well. I will say I'm more partial to Ollipop, but I like a Poppi every once in a while. Poppi is a little bit different, some similar ingredients, but there are 3 grams of fiber in Poppi, so definitely a lower dose than Ollipop, which may or may not be a good thing. We'll talk about that in a second. Also contains cassava, so again, that resistant starch, which can support the growth of bifidobacterium and Akkermansia. Poppi does contain a little bit of added sugar as well. I didn't talk about that on Ollipop, but they both contain 3 grams of added sugar. So not nothing, but really not a ton in the grand scheme of things. And Poppi also has apple cider vinegar and agave inulin in it. And these are both different types of prebiotics. Agave inulin is kind of similar to like chicory root, in where it is mostly inulin and supports the growth of bifidobacterium and lactobacillus that make the short chain fatty acids, which are good for us. Apple cider vinegar could also be its own podcast episode. But apple products contain things like pectin, which may help increase akkermansia and lactobacillus species. Apple cider vinegar also may help support digestion by helping essentially start the breakdown of protein. In some of my clients, I'll have them do like apple cider vinegar experiments where if they consume apple cider vinegar before and or with a meal that has a good amount of protein in it and they feel like it helps them digest that well when they would typically struggle, that can sometimes tell me we have a bit of hypochlorhydria going on, low stomach acid, and apple cider vinegar can just help support symptom reduction. It doesn't help support your body fixing itself, but it can help just be a way to support you feeling better while we are working on the digestive function. If they have a lot of symptoms with apple cider vinegar in this way, that can also indicate maybe we have ulcers or we have H. pylori infection or some other stuff going on that's starting to affect the lining of the GI system. And that's where that irritation can be coming from. So apple cider vinegar sometimes can just be an interesting experiment before we go pay money for supplements or more interventions or more testing, that type of thing. You also may be like, I feel no different. And if that's the case, great. You probably don't have either of those problems. And that's hopefully the majority of the population. But apple cider vinegar and apple pectin products can also essentially act as a prebiotic fiber to improve the growth of akkermansia and lactobacillus. So a lot of the other prebiotic sodas on the market are similar. I just wanted to incorporate and talk specifically about Ollipop and Poppi because I think they're the most popular right now. I also want to note that the prebiotic soda company, or I guess industry is a better word, is estimated in 2023, so 2 years ago, to be worth almost $500 million. So huge industry, growing, growing, growing. And Poppi was recently purchased by PepsiCo, so they are now owned by PepsiCo. Ollipop, to my knowledge, at the release of this podcast episode, is still privately owned. That makes a big difference to some people. Doesn't really make a difference to me. I see it cool that a company like Pepsi is purchasing a drink that could potentially be a bit healthier for the general public compared to their other drinks. But that doesn't bother me. I know some people want to be like, oh, you better watch out. Poppy's going to become less healthy because Pepsi owns it. Pepsi's trying to kill us. And I just don't really subscribe to that, even though I also know there's problems with some of these bigger companies. So when it comes to pros and cons, we're going to talk about this under the lens of anyone. And then I'm going to make it more specific to endurance athletes because there's quite a few pros and potentially quite a few cons to these products. And I want to couch this by saying buying prebiotic sodas is not within itself going to change your health or your life. And there could be some pros to it, depending on who you are. So some pros. Fiber. Most Americans don't meet the fiber recommendations. A lot of stuff being thrown around politically lately, so I want to tread on this a little bit lightly, but there have been people saying that the nutrition or healthy guidelines for Americans are wrong, and that's why America is unhealthy. It's because some higher power making all these rules, which typically are people like doctors and healthcare practitioners, are trying to make us all sick to feed into their business. I disagree. As a healthcare provider who actually works with people in the field, it's because people don't typically meet the recommendations that are set forth by people who care about health, like healthcare providers. A lot of people aren't meeting fiber recommendations when we're talking about the general public, right? A lot of people don't meet fiber recommendations, and that might be because they don't have access to healthy foods. They're in a food desert. They don't have the means to buy healthier foods. They're, choosing to spend money on other foods that don't have fiber in them. They lack education on nutrition because Lord knows we don't really teach that in the public school system. I know health teachers really try, but it's usually like, it's not something we spend as much time on typically compared to like math or social studies. So it's definitely a problem, right? That people aren't meeting their fiber intake. So if you can look at something like Ollipop or Poppi and say, oh, this is like helping me meet my fiber intake a little bit. Great. I love that because you know what? Yeah, fiber from whole foods is going to come with more nutritional benefits than fiber from a carbonated beverage because fiber in broccoli also means you're getting all the other good stuff in broccoli, like vitamins and minerals, whereas fiber in Olipop, you're pretty much just getting fiber. So take what you want with that. It is a lower sugar alternative to your traditional sodas. And I would also argue it provides a little bit more health benefit because of the added fiber compared to a diet soda that doesn't have sugar in it. There are non-nutritive sweeteners in these products like monk fruit extract and stevia. Mostly safe. Jury's out on artificial sweeteners always. Negative effects on the gut microbiome have really only been found in mice studies. And I see it anecdotally all the time in practice that some people are just more sensitive to non-nutritive sweeteners. Some people are more sensitive to specific non-nutritive sweeteners and totally fine with others. So I have a whole episode. I think it might have been one of the first ones in this series on artificial or non-nutritive sweeteners, including things like stevia and monk fruit. Splenda, equal sweet and low, all that good stuff. A couple years ago. Scroll on back if you want to listen to the data on that. But yeah, I'd say Ollipop or Poppi, maybe a little bit more health benefits than your sugary soda or your diet soda. And if I've worked with this population before. This is not really usually who I'm talking to on this podcast, so we're going to talk about endurance athletes in a sec. But I've worked with people who have diabetes and or other health conditions that are associated with metabolic disorders, who literally the only thing they took away from a session with me back when I was working in more underserved populations and general population, the only thing they took away from me is, hey, switch from soda to diet soda or switch from soda to seltzer. And they basically reduced so many things to the point where their A1C is no longer in diabetic range. That's really significant. So if some people are like, I'm just going to start drinking Dr. Goodwin Ollipop instead of Dr. Pepper, yeah, they're probably going to notice some changes. They're consuming less calories, and they're consuming less sugar. And if those things were negatively impacting them before, it's a change, right? Short and sweet, simple. Is it fixing their life? No, not necessarily, but that might be a positive for the general population in the pro category. Pro, it's a fun drink. It's a fun way to get hydration. So there's that. Also pro, it may support gut health because we're getting in more fiber, in particular, these specific types of fiber. I kind of broke it down in terms of how they support gut health. Specifically, I also want to note that, again, the doses on these are very different. So I would say Ollipop, higher dose, potentially more benefits in that category than 3 grams of fiber from a Poppi. But is the Poppi bad? No, I don't think so. Now let's talk about the cons. And this is where I'm going to merge the general population with the endurance athlete population. The cons are that they have fiber. So for endurance athletes, a lot of the endurance athletes that I talk to, especially if they're coming from a background of trying to follow the general guidelines for healthy Americans, and they're trying to eat a lot of fiber and a lot of whole foods, or even maybe they are coming back from a different end of the spectrum where they're trying to recover from an eating disorder, disordered eating, consuming high volumes of vegetables because they're trying not to gain weight. These things can make you have a really high fiber intake. So if you're throwing an Ollipop on top of an already really high fiber intake, that's not good for us either. That can fill us up too quickly, which makes us not meet our nutrition needs. It can cause GI distress because too little fiber is not good for our gut, and way too much fiber is also not good for our gut. A lot of people need to be somewhere in the middle. And we know that a lot of fiber can sometimes make us poop ourselves when we're training, right? So we want to be careful about the timing of these generally when we're endurance athletes, after your training, like at least, a couple hours before your next training segment, if not an evening of sleep. And some people are more sensitive to these things than others, which I'll talk about in a sec. Low sugar. So again, they're a lower sugar alternative to soda, and The majority of the clients I work with in the endurance athlete population struggle to meet their carbohydrate intake. So, a lower sugar option, yeah, that might not always be like the best thing or the healthiest thing for an endurance athlete if they're really struggling to meet their carbohydrate intake. Do I necessarily want them to meet their carbohydrate intake solely from things like, sodas and really high sugar products? It depends. I think for some people, they can have a ginger ale or they can have a orange soda, or they can have like juice or something like that most of their days, and that helps them meet their carbohydrate intake. They feel great, their labs look good. And for other people, they struggle with that, and we need to kind of be more mindful of where we're getting our carbs from. They need to come from lower glycemic sources. It really depends, you guys. Like, can't be more vague than that. But yeah, lower sugar drink, it might be fine. It might also be like, but it's not really helping us a ton, if we're already struggling to meet our carbohydrate intake, especially with something that has a lot of fiber in it. I will say too, some people are sensitive to the sweeteners in these, just like they might be to sodas. So individualized feedback is helpful. I will also say too, carbonation with these and endurance athletics, some people are sensitive to that. It gives them a little bit more burping or more gas. Again, you want to be careful with the timing. If you're having carbonated beverages and then you're going for a run in the afternoon and you always notice that you like have nausea or you struggle, try taking away the carbonation, see if it helps. So that's a component too. And in terms of elaborating more on the GI sensitivity, if you are sensitive to something like Ollipop or Poppi, I have found typically people are more sensitive to Ollipop just because the fiber dose is higher than Poppi. If you're having like a lot of diarrhea, bloating, cramping, and you're like, dang, this is the opposite of what Holly said this should be doing for me, then that can indicate that there might be something underlying going on in your digestive tract that we would want to look into. So things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. If you've got a ton of bacteria in the wrong places in your digestive tract and you're giving them a bunch of food, they're going to ferment that food and have a party, and you're going to have symptoms. So we want to pay attention to that. Lacking commensal bacterial species. If you're not, if you don't have enough bifidobacterium lactobacillus, and we're consuming something that's supposed to help with the growth of those things, but we don't really have a ton, during that process of trying to grow them more, eating more fiber, sometimes that fiber can sit super heavy and ferment because it's just hanging around. And that can give us symptoms. So just like anything else, whenever we increase fiber intake, we want to make sure we're increasing our water intake, and just being mindful of this should improve over time. But if it's not, maybe getting some extra help. I will also say some people are more sensitive to like high fiber intake, and having GI issues because of it when they are in peak training, high volume training, or if they've been overtraining for a long time and or under fueling. Some people just have to like reduce fiber a lot during those periods of time. It's temporary, it's fine, but that's also why we shouldn't be in that place all the time. We should have periodized training and off seasons where we can prioritize more of this stuff. IBS too. Sometimes things like Ollipop can improve IBS if more fiber is what you needed, and sometimes it can give you more symptoms if more fiber is not what you needed. I would just need to look at the specifics of you more to say if it's a good idea for you. So if you've had Ollipop or Poppi before and you've been like, yeah, they like uptick my symptoms a bunch and I already have symptoms that I'm dealing with, then definitely something you might want to look into is my Strong Runner Academy group coaching program. The next group kicks off in July. It is a program that I've built and run. I think this will be my 18th group. So I've run it over the course of the past almost 5 years. And something I've been able to add to it is optional add-on functional testing, where we can add on something like a stool test for you and a personalized one-on-one review session and plan making session of said stool test results, and make sure that we are supporting you getting on track to better digestive function. We can look up things like, what are your Akkermansia levels? What are your lactobacillus levels? What are your bifidobacterium levels? What are your digestive function levels? Do we have intestinal permeability? All the things that I talked about on this episode, that's the test where we kind of look up what is it for you? Um, and how do we improve it? Is there any dysbiosis, meaning unfriendly bacteria or imbalance of bacterial growth? Do we have infections that are unfriendly? Do we have, poor digestive function because we've been underfueling and overtraining or really stressed for a long time? So this type of stool test is very thorough and can be really helpful to help you understand the root cause of some of these things. And the group program is really helpful in the background because we're going to work on the nutritional aspects of having good digestive function as an endurance athlete, and make it more individualized to you. So if that's something that sounds like it would be helpful and you're listening to this in like June-ish of 2025, yeah, the next group starts in July. So make sure you're signed up for that. That will be the last group that I run this year. You can do so at the link in the show notes. But if you are listening to this later and you're like, oh no, that group already started, you can still visit the link in the show notes because it'll tell you when the next one is going to start, which I typically run 2 or 3 of these a year. So that would be a good program for you to plug in and get a little bit more support with why you're having these symptoms and really build from the ground up, to improve your gut health. Because yes, the main takeaway from this episode is that while prebiotic sodas may be helpful and you may enjoy them, they're kind of just like an expensive carbonated beverage with some fiber in them. We can absolutely get fiber from Whole Foods. We absolutely should be getting fiber more from Whole Foods because we're also going to be getting a lot of other nutrients from those foods. Food is super synergistic. Carbonated beverages are man-made. They're not as synergistic in terms of the nutritional benefits for our health. But if you do enjoy them occasionally and you like them and you tolerate them fine, then yeah, you can probably be like, cool, this is giving me a little bit of fiber. It's good for my gut bacteria. Sweet. So that's kind of the main takeaway from this episode is they're kind of expensive and not bad for us, but some people don't react as well to them, and there might be more digging we want to do if that's the case. But do you need these to be healthy? Absolutely not. However, would I take an Ollipop sponsorship? Yes, because I love these. I probably have like a couple a week. I don't have it every day or anything like that. So good though. So good. Reminds me of childhood. But anyway, happy running, and I'll see you in the next one.